Hello. Anyway, we're over here. We were still learning from the Ein Yaakov on Berachos. We were learning that it's a mitzvah if a person's friend or somebody else is not feeling well, one has to daven for him. One has to pray for him. And if one doesn't daven for that person, he's called a sinner. We learned that from Shmuel. Take a look at this right now. We learned it from Shmuel because it says here, right over here. We learned it from Shmuel 1, where if anyone who can request mercy from Hashem for another person who is in a difficult situation and does not request for him is called a sinner. As it is said that the prophet Shmuel told the Jewish people, and I also, far be it from me to sin against Hashem, to refrain from praying on your behalf. 1 Shmuel 12:23. In other words, Shmuel said that of course he would pray for that person. In other words, that it's a sin not to pray for the person if the person is in need of a refuah, if he has to feel better, or therapy, or he needs help in whatever way he needs help. So one has to daven for that person. So Shmuel said of course he would not sin against Hashem by not praying for him. Then there's another thing about if the person, Rava said, if the person in need of mercy is a Torah scholar, a person must even make himself sick for him by praying and fasting for him with all his strength, to the point of literally becoming sick. In other words, one has to really fast and all kinds of hishtadlus. He has to pray and daven and all kinds of ways of trying to get the person, asking Hashem for mercy for that person, if that person is a Torah scholar. So we didn't quite finish it. So anyway, now we will try to. The Gemara discusses from where this law can be learned. What is the reason for this? That from where do we know that a person should make himself sick for a suffering Torah scholar? If you say it is because it is written that King Shaul said to his attendants when he was suffering, quote, and none among you is sick for me, or reveals to me that my son Yonasan has incited my servant David to rise up and ambush me. 1 Shmuel 22:8. In other words, King Shaul said to his attendants, none of you are sick for me. None of you are feeling very bad for me. So Shaul was a Torah scholar. So do we learn from this that he said, none of you among me made yourself sick for me? I can argue that because that perhaps a king is different. Since King Shaul was a king, so of course for a king, one must also make himself sick and do all kinds of attempting to ask Hashem to make the king better. So in other words, we can't prove it that just because Shaul was a Torah scholar. Thus, we cannot prove from Shaul's comments that a person must make himself sick for the sake of a Torah scholar. Rather, proof can be brought from the following statement that King David made about Doeg and Achitophel, two Torah scholars who were suffering. And this is what King David had said. But as for me, when they were ill, my clothing was sackcloth, and I afflicted myself with fasting. Tehillim 31:13. So in other words, this is what we can learn it from. When King David, two Torah scholars were suffering. So he said, for me, when they were ill, when Doeg and Achitophel were ill, his clothing was sackcloth. He afflicted himself with fasting. He was fasting, and he was wearing sackcloth for these Torah scholars that they should be well. Over here it says, Shaul was a Torah scholar. He suffered as a result of his mistaken belief that David was a threat to his life. Here Shaul complains that his servants did not themselves become sick from his pain, or let them know that his son Jonathan had entered into a pact with David, Marsha. And 6, although a Torah scholar is on a higher level than a king, Shaul was both a scholar and a king. Therefore, no proof can be brought from him. Teshuvos Chasam Sofer. Okay, so anyway, so we're learning from this that it's a very big mitzvah when somebody, God forbid, doesn't feel well, one has to daven for him. And especially if one is a Torah scholar, one has to make all kinds of hishtadlus, all kinds of attempts of praying and fasting to try to get the person better, of course, to see if one can help the person in a material way. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for watching. Take care. This is from Ein Yaakov, and this is from Tractate Berachos. Ein Yaakov Tractate Berachos. Thank you very much. Be well.